you can let me know privately if you prefer not. But okay, so the UDL IRN Implementation Research Network was an organization that began somewhere around, what was it, Alice, in 2010, something like that? As a grassroots organization that was intended to facilitate networking, research, and implementation of UDL, surprisingly enough, around the world. That grassroots organization probably is not so grassroots anymore. They've grown pretty large, you know. And so their conference the first year had about 50 people, and last year it was well over 1,000. So it's been rather exponential growth. However, higher education specifically has not been a substantial focus of that group, just because UDL hasn't substantially focused on higher education until very recently. So a lot of the time in conversations, it seemed to have been this idea that the concepts and materials that we were developing for a K-12 context would just be transferable to a higher education context. And for those of us who are involved in higher education, we know that that context is very different, and that sort of translation is not always so smooth. So this,
and I'll just throw out, you know, from Cass' perspective, it really was UDL really was founded in research at Harvard in higher ed. So I don't think there was any intention to exclude a higher ed by any means. UDL was really, you know, developed to be about the learning brain, of which we all have those brains. I just think the language tended to be focused on K-12.
Absolutely. And so we stepped in to try to make that more explicit and to specifically focus on implementation of UDL in the context of higher education. So this group, which started about a year ago, this is our fourth and final quarterly meeting of 2018, started with about 6 people showing up. And it's been growing in interest and in numbers and just really getting energy behind it. So we're very thankful to have you here and to join us in the conversation. For those of you who are just coming in, please find in the chat window, there's a place for you to sign in and see who's already here for potential networking. So in each of our quarterly meetings, we have a certain theme or topic that we're exploring. And so this time we're talking specifically about conferences. Our plan for our next chat is to move into more controversial subjects and try to facilitate a real significant debate or discussion around a topic that we feel that there's disagreement in the field around. But this one is quite polite. So we're really just talking about conferences and sharing out on conferences. So you're welcome. In the shared notes, if you scroll down past the introductions, you can see the discussion points that we'll be exploring. I want to start by introducing Jen. Jen Pusateri, am I saying her last name right?
Sorry, I was muted so I could drink my coffee. Yes, you are. That's correct. Pusateri.
All right, Jen.
You can't say it any worse than what it actually is.
Okay, so Jen Pusateri is one of our fantastic colleagues and members who really had the energy and the drive to start a UDL higher education Twitter chat. And so she's been driving that initiative. There's actually our third Twitter chat is tonight at 8, well, tonight, my time, US time, so 8 p.m. Eastern time, and that's going to be focused on how we facilitate engagement in higher ed. Is that right, Jen?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And I know that we've been, Jen and I have been talking about looking for more people who want to be involved as co-facilitators.
There she is, hi.
And so, Jen, if you want to speak more to that about potential for others to get involved.
Yeah, so we're always looking for people who will be happy to sort of come in and co-lead it. If you are Seton, maybe, if that's you, people in your office, we can totally hear you. That'd be great.
Yeah, just
yeah, so what we're looking for are some people that will sort of help code that. So if you have something that's working really well at your university that you would like to share with everybody, or if you've got some questions that you would just like to throw out, we would love to have you join us with that. So you can message me on Twitter, and I'm at Jen_Pusateri. I'll type that in the chat box in just a second. And you can also email me at the University of Kentucky, and I'll put that in there as well. But we would love that, and I'd love to have somebody join me. It looks like I just messaged somebody yesterday, and they have said that they would be happy to help with that, so that's exciting. But we are looking for some help, so let's join up.
The great thing I learned about Twitter is if you can't join during that time, you can still contribute to the conversation, and it's still, I mean, maybe everyone already knows that, and that's news to me, but then, you can still be part of that conversation, even if it's not right during that time. So feel free to join anytime.
Yep. And we are moving the times around. So right now, we have been, the first 2 months we tried at lunchtime, we were just sort of guessing, we have no idea. Lunchtime Eastern, that is. And I'll tell you right now, I'm in Portland, Oregon for a conference, and it's 6 a.m. So like I am now really conscious. So we're having this one at 8 p.m. this evening Eastern time. So for me in Portland, that'll be 5 p.m. But we're looking for different times because we know we're trying to accommodate folks from all across the country and all across the world as well. So we want to make sure that that's working for us. So if something's not working for you, let us know. We want to know. We want to know how we can make this accommodation for everyone. Thanks.
Okay, and for those of you who are not aware of it, our special interest group does have a website, and this is where we chronicle these conversations, where we share out the notes, share out the recordings, give updates and upcoming events, that kind of thing. I've dropped it in the notes and I've dropped it in the chat. So please feel free to bookmark that and to visit it. Often we try to keep it updated as best we can. So, all right, well, let's jump in then. So we're interested today in talking about UDL higher education conferences, and this does not explicitly have to mean a conference that has UDL in the title. And so, we'll cast and the UDL IRN, obviously those in the US at least are major conferences related to UDL. We see a lot of the footwork being done at conferences that are not explicitly related to UDL, but in which UDL is breaking in as part of the message and how it connects to other fields and disciplines. So we want to hear from you, especially since we have people from at least four different countries now, giving this a distinct international quality. What's happening? What do you see happening in terms of UDL conferences at this point, and what do you think needs to happen next? You can feel free to unmute yourself and jump in verbally, or use the back channel chat. If it gets to be unwieldy, we'll break out into breakout rooms.
I find that a lot of this stuff tends to be still focusing heavily on theory and not enough on practice at the conferences that I've been at. So I kind of find that worry when I'm trying to bring it back into my organization and say, look, you need to do this, when like some of the conferences might give, off the cuff examples, but they don't, that's just one lecture in one physics module that doesn't really I want to bring it in at a higher level, and how do I do it from that kind of stance? And I'm not really getting that. I'm getting, again, it still goes back to a lot on theory and not enough on how we can do this as kind of a divisional thing. So, how does the engineering division do it as a whole, so I can sell it as a thing? It's just, I find it quite difficult, and I don't see enough of that at the conferences I've been to. But a lot of mine focus on assistive technology, and not necessarily always on UDL. So it's a bit of a mix, really.
Can I ask just a clarifying question to better understand too? When you say to integrate more, are you thinking at the department level? Are you thinking about across a campus level, or all of it?
Across the campus level, but I'm just thinking sometimes. Like, that's the one thing I see. I know that we're only talking about conferences here, and we're not going into specifics, and that's for the next time. But I just find that, at higher ed, I find, politics, like we have interdepartmental factions within their own thing. So you're trying to they won't even talk to each other as is. How are they going to all come together and be like, oh yeah, let's get on board this idea? And it depends again on where the feed comes from. It has to come top down for me, and a lot of the higher, there's a big drive towards increasing rankings and research and pushing away from a little bit from teaching and learning, I find, and I think that makes this whole process a lot more difficult. So I know Eric was talking earlier about, Ireland making progress, but I see a lot of theory again, and I don't see that practice. And it's easy to put down, this is a principle. The one where all the animals lined up, which is these, I've seen so many of the same stuff over and over again. I'm just like, I want a real world example, please. And then, like a lot of stuff that I follow online on Twitter, and when I beat to conferences like ATA, I see a lot of people talking about in-house classroom ones, which is much easier to maintain and manage, and the teacher has a lot more control over what's been done. Whereas at higher level, like politics, red tape, incentive, I could go on for a good bit saying the difficulties that come up, but they're not really addressed for me in conferences, which is where I started from, I guess.
So is anybody seeing anything that addresses that concern that of needing more practical ways of addressing these types of barriers? Anybody seeing that either at their own universities or in conferences? Do you have anything you might be able to share out to that end?
I want to read what looks like Darla put in the chat box. So I don't know if she's able to share that out loud, but she's talking about sort of this idea that UDL is only about like ADA compliance, accessibility, captioning, that kind of thing, right? Alt text. And so she said that she's having some issues. Oh, she has laryngitis. Oh, I'm sorry. Darla has laryngitis. I hope you feel better, Darla. But that's kind of an issue. And I'm experiencing the same thing at my university. The issue being that UDL is seen as, and I've brought this up before, but it's like the accessibility, that particular accessibility part is 2 out of like 31 checkpoints, right? And so there's this whole other range of information that no one even knows exists. And so I know on my campus, what I'm really looking for help with is how to go from, I'm kind of having to rebrand UDL, I guess, is what I'm based on university.
Sorry, what did you call it?
Rebranding. Yeah, sorry, that's a thing we do here. So like the way that UDL has been sold on my campus so far, I'm using quote fingers, sold on my campus has been, and this was prior to me, has been that it's just about closed captioning and alt text. And that's pretty much, if you're doing that, you're good. And of course we know that that's not necessarily the case. Like there's a whole other world of instructional things that need to be done. So the rebranding is me just sort of trying to give UDL a different name. So when someone hears UDL on our campus, I want them to think big picture, not just those specific things, and I'm good. Does that make more sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Paddy Turner from the UK. I work at Sheffield Hallam University and also work for the National Association of Disability Practitioners in the UK. And Thomas, I'm sure we probably come across each other at a HEAD conference in
Yeah, and I was
Ireland.
in Sheffield. I was in Sheffield at AAATE last year.
Right, okay.
Were you at
I don't
that?
think I was. No, I wasn't at that, but we may well have come across each other at the HEAD conferences. I don't know. Just the I come from, I suppose, a disability background, but I actually work now within an educational development area of the university. So it's not disability specific. It's developing the practice of academics across the institution. So very aware of the dangers of focusing too much on disability and accessibility as opposed to something more universal. But at the same time, I find that, Thomas's question, give me a practical example. What am I going to do is one of the most dangerous questions to answer, because you answer it and then it's not that in itself isn't universal. So universal design can be quite misleading in the sense that, what's good universal design in engineering is not good universal design in mathematics. And so if you try and give answers around a universal answer, a practical example, then half the audience are going, well, that's not going to work for me. So I'm trying to focus, and I appreciate, Thomas, it is still very theoretical, trying to focus on the idea of people getting a really deep understanding of what the principles of universal design, the principle of inclusion mean, and then being able to operate them in their own contexts. Because also it's, an ongoing process. It's not, you know, here's my universal design plan, tick, 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 done it, great, finished, put that to one side and move on to something else. It's something that you need to be implementing on an ongoing basis. So I understand why the cry for, you know, give me an example, what do I need to do, how can I sell it? But it isn't an easy question to answer, and that's probably why no one's ever answered it satisfactorily anyway.
I love that example. It really resonates because when you ask about universal design and architecture, you get everything from curb cuts to easy grip tools. And it's really about the mindset and what's in the head of the designer as they're planning it. And that's really hard to bring to life. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's try to synthesize based on what Thomas said and what Patty said. It seems like there's both a need for practical solutions and also a need to recognize that practical solutions are contextual. And so going to a conference and just saying, this is what we're doing, and this is what you should do, maybe that would be counterproductive. So how can we address the need for examples, for strategies that can be put into play without killing the creativity and the principle-driven nature of UDL?
I'll pipe in here because I'm a checklist kind of person. I'm a to-do list, checklist. I want to cross off some boxes. So I like the list with the numbers on it, the guidelines with the numbers. And so I was at one of our sister colleges in Ontario a couple of weeks ago talking about UDL, and I gave people, depending on where they are with their knowledge of UDL, I said, okay, if you're just starting out, here's a couple things you can consider. A name tag. Name tags help build community. It helps develop relationships, you know, familiarity, all of these things that really support an inclusive environment. And that doesn't matter what discipline you're teaching in. So I give a few of those, but then if you're a little bit further down the line, maybe it's about making sure you have accessible documents. Again, that's agnostic to a discipline. And the room was filled with folks from many different disciplines. But I think if we had more time, we would have said, okay, now go into your own areas or within your disciplines to really dig deep into what's really meaningful and can change the way how you're teaching and learning. I actually think that you need to have something that's tangible that people can wrap their head around and have an easy win to gain some momentum, to gain some movement, and to sort of not get bogged down by all of the checkpoints. So that's one way how I approach it, and it's had some success, I would say. But.
I agree with Danny. So I came from the K-12 world and have just started in the higher ed world like this last year. And one of the things that I have found astounding is that small things that one would take for granted, I guess, in the K-12 world, like including a turn and talk portion, like where you turn and talk to your neighbor in the middle of a lecture, is a mind blower for some professors. And so like, I really had to sort of take my mind out of the like 60 miles an hour UDL that I was thinking about in K-12 and really bring it back to the basic things that we think about, like what you said, you know, a name tag, or perhaps breaking assignments down so that they have small segments as opposed to a humongous assignment. Those things are again translatable to every discipline, but I think we have to really look at the small wins, like what you're saying. Give them sort of a good win right there at the beginning to sort of hook them in, if you will, and then that's going to give them a lot more interest in UDL. And one of the things I found with K-12 teachers that is translatable as well to higher ed is breaking the guidelines down into levels as opposed to the whole thing. Because to me, I don't like words. I much prefer visuals. And so that's a lot of words on a page, and that's a lot of sort of difficult to translate words. So one of the things I found successful is breaking that down into levels. So looking at just sort of the entry level. This is, if you're looking for like the first thing to do to start incorporating UDL, these are some things to do. So I don't know, it's worked so far for me.
voicing Darla here, since she has laryngitis, she's talking about how she tends to use existing problems and barriers that faculty bring to her, and then use UDL framework as a way to address that. So instead of leading with UDL, let the barriers that faculty are bringing to us guide the process of implementing UDL, and others are expressing that that's been extremely effective for them as well.
Do you want me to share what we're sort of doing in our neck of the woods? So Darla works at Mohawk, and she's been doing some amazing work with UDL there, and has institutional buy-in, and I'm completely jealous. So I'm at George Brown College in downtown Toronto. She's a few minutes away in more southern Ontario. We've had 2 pan-Canadian UDL conferences, I'm going to say over the past 4 years. They were hosted on the East Coast, and there's no real plans for a third one that I know of just yet. And Darla and I were actually at a conference earlier this week together talking about this. And there's, Darla, I'm going to speak for you because you're connecting here, but we had a quick chat about, is there some sort of UDL unconference, an opportunity for an unconference? There's even been conversations at George Brown, should we be holding the 3rd Pan-Canadian conference? I'm not sure where that stands institutionally. So there is some interest there. I know institutionally speaking, certain institutions are ahead of the game and are hosting UDL-focused, PD, UDL-focused conference lights, I'd say, or with a lowercase c. So obviously Mohawk's quite further down the line. You have Durham College, which is further down the line. Centennial, where I used to teach at, they had Joni Degner there last year to help drive some momentum. And then we had a UDL-focused faculty day a few weeks ago. And then George Brown had a pilot last year, just waiting to see what sort of comes out of that, when we looked at what does the institution need to create success for UDL. So that's sort of going on. I know that in BC, the province has a UDL initiative running in K-12. If you saw Shelley Moore's video last week about don't shit on me, a really popular video being circulated last week. She is Canadian, but I think she might be teaching in the US now. I'm not sure. So that's sort of happening. And the other thing that's happening in March here is the Digital Pedagogy Lab from the US is hosting a session in Toronto. They're from, is it Maryland State University? Does that make sense? I have to look it up. But they're hosting, and they actually had a session at Ryerson University here a few weeks ago. And they are all about technology, obviously Digital Pedagogy Lab, but also being really critical about pedagogy. And yeah, Mary Washington. Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And they're like doing things like radical assessments and giving students lots of choice and ungrading. And so they're really like in the spectrum. Even for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can attend this conference because it's going to be, I don't know if I can handle it. But I think there's certainly some UDL attributes that are woven into their topics. They may not be framed as UDL, but there's certainly the principles are woven into their strategy and their discussions. And I can share the handles for them. I know one is Sean Michael Morris, and I'll type them in a minute. So I've been following them, and they actually had an open YouTube session last week about inclusive learning practices. So again, not UDL focused, but inclusive nonetheless. The last thing I'll mention, that if you're interested, maybe Darla, if you're listening still, you can toss up the link for eCampus Ontario. So eCampus Ontario is a provincial body here that is trying to promote 21st century learning practices. geared to higher ed specifically, which is so wonderful. So it's open to any college faculty or any university faculty, and they can run through modules. So I think we're in the second iteration now. We'll start the third iteration in January, where it's going to be a MOOC concept versus now, which is completely asynchronous. But you've got 6 modules to go through, and at the end of each module, if you complete all the tasks, you can earn a badge. And there's 6 different pillars, and I'm gonna have to be reminded what the 6 pillars are. So I'm gonna open up. If you go to the web page under educators, I'm gonna find it here. Where is?
And as he's looking, if other folks want to add in ideas they have, contexts that you have, that you're thinking of, other conferences, other takeaway resources, feel free to keep adding.
Can I share my screen? Can I do that?
You have that function at the bottom of your screen. Does it say share?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll show it really quickly here, because you can do it if you're interested. If you can just give me a thumbs up or something to let me know that you can see my screen, that would be helpful. Awesome, thank you, Allison. So you see here, we have this thing called the Anatomy of the 21st Century Educator, Teaching for Learning, Curation, Technology, Collaboration. So there's tools, there's apps, there's activities. You can go through that at your own pace, so on and so forth. And UDL actually is in one of those. I forget which one, but it's actually there. So that's another thing that's happening, where we're trying to drive, different teaching practices, especially for a group of employees or teachers that don't have formal teacher training. And that's based upon some research that eCampus Ontario did with Tony Bates out of Vancouver. Anyway, those are sort of the things that are happening here.
That sounds good. In the chat, I'm seeing a lot of people are talking about a lack of UDL in what appears to be places where you would expect it to be, like Lilly conferences. We have one person really driving the effort at POD. And I'm curious about how this group of about 150 people are known people who are interested and invested in UDL and higher education. How many of you have made some sort of a conference proposal to a place that was not an explicit UDL conference the last year? So I wonder if we're all waiting for somebody else to do it. It's sort of a diffusion of responsibility. What I like to stress, like a lot of us feel rightly that we're new at this. We're novices, but there's nobody else who's further along than we are. We are the early implementers. And so if we're not sharing out what we're doing at those conferences, nobody's sharing it out. There's something to think about.
We're pretty excited. Goodwin College and College Star and CAST went in on a proposal and got accepted to South by Southwest. So it's just called UDL and Higher Education. There is nothing magical about the title, but we're really excited. We're going to have our first meeting after the holiday here to talk about how we're going to put it together. But like Eric is saying, we're just really excited to have UDL just even brought up there. We had some colleagues there last year and they just said UDL is just not in the conversation. So if we can start, as Eric's saying, start just submitting and collaborating together and really putting ideas out there. No, there is no magic box for learning, but UDL seems to be a platform that really allows us to be intentional about how we design. And if we start sharing that and opening up that conversation humbly, really admitting no one knows, and we can keep waiting and waiting for more and more, data to come in. I think I really love the idea of trying to get our voices out more.
Allison, if you need any co-presenters for that conference, I will be happy to join you for that.
So for those of you who have attended, we're moving on into question 2 a little bit, though we've kind of been jumping around with the questions. But to focus on question 2 for a moment, for those of you who have attended conferences, and I know recently we've had EduCause, we've had POD, we've had the Goodwin College Symposium, and so on and so forth. For those of you who had the opportunity to attend these, is anybody seeing any major takeaways or resources that you can share out? What is the state of conferences right now?
I want to recognize, Darla, yes, I think you're right. A major problem is funding. I mean, once you submit, then you're stuck having to figure out how to pay for it. I think that's a really very real concern. Anyone have suggestions? Magic sources of funding?
I guess we're all on the same boat with that one. But
Okay.
so, work to be done. So for the who has gone to a conference recently? Like, is there, since we have some people from the UK and Ireland here, and we haven't before, I'm interested in hearing what's going on over in Europe as far as conferences. Would any of you be willing to share out?
Yeah, hi, Paddy again. I did put it in the chat. I think I mentioned ahead Ireland, who always have a conference in March. I'm sure their call for papers will have been out for some time in Dublin. That always has quite a strong emphasis on UDL and inclusive practice. I've put in the chat our own NADP conference, which is always in the summer. That's June. So I don't know how many of you know Nicole Offish. I'm sure some of you do. Yeah. So she presented a few years ago, and we've had quite a few contributors from the States in the past. Always lively, engaging, fun events to be at. Yay! So there's 2.
Yeah, I put one in there in the link as well as the UDLHE one up here, 2018 in the chat. I missed it. It was only on there recently, and it was about 3 universities in Dublin came together, and so they have 3 different presidents, and the idea was that they were all supporting UDL and the implementation. So there was the whole thing of where UDL was going to kind of come in from the ground up from the merger of these 3 colleges. I followed it a bit on Twitter. Again, I wasn't sure about, I'm going to say real world examples or practicals, sorry. But again, they were stating a lot of stuff that I would have thought was, some of it was given, like, you know, and they talked about this thing about, you know, rewarding lecturers or having some sort of rewarding academics for, you know, work they've done in the area of UDL. My argument was always against that. It was about, you know, should you have to reward that? Paddy is right though. A head do one around March every year on UDL, and they've had people like Kate Novak as well. And yeah, again, we go to that almost every year. So, but again, it would be nice to see a lot more international people there. I guess they're bringing a lot of ideas. We do get people from Canada, States at it, but I'd like to see a lot more, I guess, you know, research focused as well. Whereas it tends to be like kind of sometimes more informal in different sessions. It really depends, like, you know. So I have presented at it myself, but you get a real mixed group as to what's presenting, like, you know. It's but like, yeah, ahead, as Paddy said, is right. And UDLHE it was apparently was in Ireland 2 years ago as well. I didn't see that then either, but I guess, you know, there's a lot going on. You don't always catch everything.
So I'm seeing in the chat, there's a little side conversation going on about, you know, a lot of people feel maybe based on finances, you know, and funding and so forth, feel grounded geographically. And, you know, especially in places in the world where UDL is a little bit more isolated, like we have a couple people practicing it in Israel, or where it might not be well connected to the larger body of practitioners, maybe we need to facilitate some sort of a digital conference. Has anybody attended such a thing before? Have any ideas how that might work?
I'll just pipe in. Microsoft they had a Hack the Classroom event a few weeks ago. And it was international. It was live via, it wasn't on YouTube. It was Facebook Live. They did it on Facebook Live. And they actually had an in-person component. Who cares where? But then there was like 500 of us watching in real time, and they had just different speakers queued up, and they had some videos and things like that. So it was Microsoft, so it was really highly produced. But you had people commenting and participating from all over the world and watching. Like, that's a concept. It doesn't have to be highly produced or highly stylized, but I think what they did was they kept pushing it out for weeks leading up to the event. They said what kind of speakers were going to be there at what times in the multiple time zones. And then you could just log in whenever. Actually, you didn't even have to log in because it was Facebook Live. And then you just turned it on and you watched. It wasn't very participatory, but maybe that could be something that we could consider.
So in the chat box, Leslie Johnson says that she has attended several digital conferences and would be interested in helping to organize one. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, so let's definitely pursue that. Maybe we can follow up with this group asynchronously after this meeting and talk about how we might be able to set up a UDL Higher Ed Digital Conference 2019. Sounds like a great idea to me. If it's something like, I've seen some conferences that was like a marathon, like a 24-hour thing going on, and with people in different time slots. So you're not necessarily attending the whole day, but like whatever the time zone makes sense for you, you're kind of popping in at that time. Maybe it could be something like that. Awesome. And so that would really be a way for us to coalesce around UDL and higher education as a group of core professionals, but we're also talking about the need to get this message out to other conferences. So where are you seeing the greatest need for UDL to enter the conversation where it is not currently? Let me rephrase that question. So, as we're thinking about what kinds of conferences, it sounds like people already gave some ideas, but those are not necessarily conferences that everybody here would go to. Help me figure out a broader way of framing this. Where is the need for us to bring UDL outside of our core group? I don't know if that was good rephrasing.
Or do we need to stay within our own core group and continue to feel like we're building out our own practices and, before? Is it, maybe it's both.
I think, teacher education programs is a good one as well. I know that's gone back into, this is higher education, but like, I mean teachers at higher education who are teaching, K-12 students, get them thinking, getting the students thinking about UDL, and then it naturally starts to come fester through. That's the only way, to be honest, I could see it really disseminate, because if the teachers are on board, the students are on board, then it becomes a natural thing, and it makes it a lot easier for when those people go out, whether it's the workplace, whether it's in higher education or elsewhere, that they're thinking that, yeah, there's always multiple means for doing these different things. But you'd be waiting a long time for your return. But,
I think there's some openness right now within STEM communities, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and an emphasis on broadening participation. And I've been in a couple of computing conferences and things where where the subject of UDL has come up. So I think people are starting to talk about within the STEM communities ways in which they can innovate pedagogically. And some people at least are starting to think about UDL as a potential framework. And I'm certainly putting that myself in those situations. So that just might be an audience. It seems like an odd one, right? But some of these STEM specific conferences might be a place to at least initiate some of the conversations.
Adrian, that really resonates with me, because what we found is that when you start opening up maker spaces, for example, there are a lot of barriers there. And so UDL aligns so well with that, because just having a maker space isn't UDL, but it's like, what are the barriers in that space? Who's not able to access it? Who's distracted? You know, so I think it's such an exciting place to be able to position UDL, because then it's not just UDL for UDL, but it's UDL to support something. And that's where it becomes really powerful.
And piggybacking off of that, Allison, there's a lot of work right now in supporting entrepreneurship,
Yes.
Which kind of relates to that. And again, people that are trying to do that are trying to get some individuals who truly like very much will benefit from UDL practices. And really, so that's another area where possibly we can support UDL.
There's a lively discussion in the chat right now about executive and academic leadership, and relatedly getting funding and support for UDL. Kevin was asking, does anybody have any kind of a pitch presentation that they would be willing to share about getting administrators on board?
I don't have one, but I can bring that to the College Star group, because I know that they have confronted this in multiple institutions. So at least I can put the word out, and maybe we can get.
Thanks, Adrian. I was wishing that Sarah was in here in the chat right now in the conversation, because I know she's just been a huge advocate, Sarah Williams, on our campus, and she was responsible for me being totally reassigned as a UDL faculty fellow at our institution. And I don't know how she pitched it, but you know, that was a full position that our administration dedicated. So I will definitely talk to her next time and see if I can get that pitch to the group.
I know in Thomas Tobin and Kirsten Belling's new book, they talk about using retention as a big motivator for administrators. And I don't know that we have a lot of data, because UDL is so new in higher ed. Theoretically, it should reduce attrition rates. It should improve graduation rates. But I think this is something in which we really need to be doing action research. And so in those places where we're seeing UDL happening, to collect data, what's happening in terms of retention. And even, you know, if we start getting that data and publishing it out and sharing it at conferences, then the rest of us can use it to get our stubborn administrators you know, to start moving, because we're speaking their language.
And the question has to be bigger, or, you know, more pointed than, does UDL work? Because UDL is too large a framework. It's too big a construct. So it has to be a really specific piece in order, I think, for it to have any leg to stand on.
Okay, I'm going to try talking because I feel compelled to weigh in on this topic, and I don't think I can type it fast enough. I'm very sorry that you're stuck listening to me. I did just present at TESS on Monday, a conference here like this. It was horrific. Anyway, so here at Mohawk, not here, I'm in my house, but at Mohawk, we have buckets of institutional support. We just do. I'm incredibly fortunate. How my role came about was through the academic leadership team saying, oh my goodness, we need to do this. Why they feel that way, the hook for them was twofold. One, it was reducing the amount of student accommodations. So by being able to reduce the amount of student accommodations, they could actually save money through faculty who were going to their union saying we need additional time and those kinds of things. So that was the first thing. The second thing was I do work in a unionized environment. I'm faculty, I'm part of a union here. The other real hook for the academic side of the house was really around better support for our faculty. So really making it so our faculty feel like they could teach all of our international students, that they could participate in these Indigenous education initiatives, that they could reach their students with disabilities without having to provide as many. I mean, there will always be a place for individual accommodations, of course, but as many individual accommodations. And so it really came from a less complaints standpoint, and a saving money standpoint. The other thing that's been helpful for us here in Ontario, sorry, is we have new legislation, provincial legislation, disability-related legislation. And while it has caused me some headaches with people getting confused with UDL and AODA, which is the acronym for that legislation, what has been really helpful is that there's a bit of a hook there. So our leadership, when that new legislation came in, our leadership was looking at that saying, okay, well, what is our fastest, easiest, least labor-intensive way to meet this? And so I have spent the last 2 years really working to explain it short-sighted if you're only working using UDL to meet this disability-related legislation. So that's a bit of a thorn in my side. But it has been incredibly helpful with getting leadership on board. And again, I have buckets of it. If you go to the Mohawk College UDL web pages, pretty much anything that we have there, including the $100,000 research project we just did that we finished in March, all of that is through having really, really great leadership support, incredible leadership support. Okay, I will stop talking now. I'm very sorry. Thank you for listening. Okay, gonna mute.
I'm so glad you spoke. Other thoughts related to this? I definitely think one of the things that's really resonating about that is that you're starting with a need, some problem, and then UDL is a way to think about how to reduce barriers and solve that problem. And there's a measurement right there. So I think both of those, whether it's saving money or fewer complaints, those are things you can actually measure.
I think too at our institution, there's a huge focus on those, as I think Adrienne mentioned, those drop, fail, withdrawal rates. I mean, that's just been a huge motivation for administrators to listen to what we want to say. And that's, something that is pretty easy to pitch and because they'll listen. And especially when we're talking about the drop, fail, withdraw rates in these incredibly large classes we have of 150 students. And we're also getting that instructor buy-in too, just because they're so eager to work with the learner variability.
One of the things that we experienced at George Brown was that notion that UDL is accessibility, and trying to a certain extent pull those apart, because sometimes people see accessibility as somebody else's thing. Oh, it's the accessibility technologist's job to make sure the course pack is accessible, or they've got a screen reader. Good, I'm done. And so I've been playing around with it. So I'd love to hear what other people are doing in terms of it, but I've actually tried to step away from the accessibility conversation, or even the conversation around, accommodations would be minimized. Sure, some of the, and I'm not going to use the right vernacular, but some of the more simpler accommodations might move to the wayside, like an accessible document or something like that. But we've got more mental health issues, we have more complex challenges, so it's not like the accessibility team's workload is going to decrease necessarily. It might just be shifting to deal with more people coming into the offices and self revealing that they need accommodations or what have you. So I don't know. This is one of the big questions I'd love to, I think we could probably have a whole conversation just about this, is like, how do you manage that balance between accessibility? You guys have AODA, you have ADA, we have AODA, and UDL, and try to say this is bigger. And, you know, Jennifer and I have been sort of punting back and forth a little bit this week about that, but I know I think we need to say it's everybody's role, not just somebody in accessibility services.
I'm going to follow up on that by just adding that as a faculty developer, the idea of disentangling UDL from accommodations might not be the best strategy. Faculty know accessibility, and they know accommodations, and they know accommodations as a pain in the ass. Frankly, that's the attitude of a lot of faculty. So for me, I'm pitching, at my institution, I'm really pitching UDL as a preemptive, as creating preemptive accommodations. It's 6 a.m. What can I say? That didn't quite come out right. But I'm also at Todd this morning, and have new appreciation for our West Coast colleagues. In any case, I am building UDL, programming in UDL faculty learning circles with that hook that we're going to create courses and course materials that don't require accommodations. And that's been really effective and really appealing to our faculty.
I want to piggyback on that. You know, sometimes I get pushback from faculty when we talk about, for example, alt text or whatever, and they think about, like, I've maybe seen one blind student in my 15 years of teaching here. Why am I going to go through all this effort for the sake of a hypothetical extreme minority of students? And so by using the UDL approach, I really try to sell, we're really not working specifically for a minority of students. This is for all of our students. Absolutely, it has dramatic impact for our students' disabilities, but it also enhances learning for everybody. And the best way I've found to get that message across is to model it to them in learning experiences, where providing both examples and non-examples, and then being explicit about it. In fact, Jen Pusateri has a way of doing this, where she somewhat comically ends her presentations with "you've been UDL'd." You know, has a slide that shows, you know, how she's used engagement, multiple means of engagement, representation, and action expression, and gets them to think about how did that improve this learning experience compared to the professional developments where you sit and watch a PowerPoint presentation and listen to somebody drone on about something you don't care about, you know, and get them to think about, now, what would that look like in your classroom? That sort of explicit modeling with intention to transfer can be very powerful for helping faculty see the value.
Another thing too that I've been trying to sort of concentrate on lately is thinking about sort of, and I can't think of a better way to say this, but the invisible disabilities, right? Like things like learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD, all of these things. And I'm working with the Honors College at the moment, and I was able to work with the DRC, our Disability Resource Center, and get them to give me a number of how many students in their Honors College are receiving services from the Disability Resource Center. And it was a pretty good number, like 100 and something out of not very many students. So when I'm meeting with them in a couple of weeks, I'm going to share that information with them. Now, I don't have any info about it could be food allergies. I mean, you know, it could be a lot of things. But the fact that 115 honors students are requiring some kind of accommodation from the Disability Resource Center means that those things all have an impact on their learning and that goes on in the classroom. So I've been sort of thinking about that sort of invisible disabilities portion. And also, one of the biggest things that we found from some student feedback that we've collected is that the executive functioning areas are what students are asking for help on. They want more help with things like time management and organization. And that's all students. That's not just students that are associated with the Disability Resource Center. So, and that's also one of the things that the faculty complain about, frankly, is that, well, why aren't they doing the reading? And how come they can't get together and turn in papers on time? I mean, those are the things that they're asking about as well. So being able to sort of plug in UDL as well, this could be some of the reason, and using the framework really as a problem-solving framework, I think.
And we know with their brains still forming that that's right, that they don't have that executive function yet, that last frontal lobe development. So, you know, we could back that up with some brain pictures and everyone will jump on board. I'm saying sarcastically.
But I think that's accurate. I mean, that they're university faculty. They want to know things like that. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's useful too. And also, I don't know about you guys. I mean, the statistics for higher education in the UK is like 12 to 14% disabled students, and that's just disclosed. And what I try and remind people is that, you know, disability, there's a lot of undisclosed disability, and also it's on a spectrum. So, you know, just because there happens to be a sort of not entirely arbitrary line, but there is a line, one side of which you're officially recognised, and the other side of which you're not. Still leaves those people who are very close to that line, you know, probably disadvantaged quite significantly. So I think, you know, in terms of numbers, you can expand that minority into quite a significant minority that would have a huge impact on retention and attainment statistics, which is so important for all academics to aim for. So I try and pile those arguments in as well.
And the other piece that's so critical is it's not like you just have an ability or a disability. It depends on the context. So it's almost like if we're saying, here's a line and you either make it or don't, we're then not valuing the importance of that context. So the more we can try to bring that to light, like, yes, this student maybe didn't demonstrate that skill in this context, but look at with this one thing, what we saw. So I think just really that language is one that I don't tend to hear educators use or think about, that perspective. So the more we can kind of infiltrate with that would be nice. Eric, I'm noticing we have 2 minutes left.
Yes,
so
I'm noticing that too. I'm making new headers in our document. One of them that I feel like we need to have based on our conversation is down towards the bottom, needed conference presentations. For example, I'm just dropping in there, facilitating executive functions. Please go ahead and populate that based on things we've been talking about, so that then this group can be drawing from those when those conference call for papers come out. Let's talk about this. Jenna's advertised in the UDL Higher Ed Twitter chat at 8 p.m. Eastern this evening for those of us on the west side of the ocean. And so if you're able to join that, please do. It's difficult with these conversations to stay focused on one theme, and I love that. It seems like we drift into a lot of really important topics today. But again, the driving purpose of one of them for today was to talk about conferences. We did expose the need for all of us to be pushing forward this agenda in UDL. Don't wait for some groundbreaking new research to bring it to conferences. The state we're at right now is we need to hear that it's happening, that we're struggling through together. The people are trying things and this is what they're learning. It might not, to go back to Thomas's point, it might not be that what's happening in your school will apply immediately to my school, but nevertheless, I want to hear what's happening so that I can think about how that might translate to a different type of setting. I preach this every time and I want to preach it again. We are the early implementers. If we're not bringing the message forward, nobody is. It is on each of us here. We're a small group, but we've got to be doing the work here. So it's awesome that you're here. Know that you're important. Know that we need your voice in the field. Please continue to bring that forward. So we did put both in the chat and in the resources, there is a UDL Higher Education Conference suggestions that this group is very strongly encouraged to use. This is just a place where you can say, hey, I heard about this conference that we could bring UDL to. Drop it in that form, and then you can look at the resulting spreadsheet. So if you're thinking, I've got funding for spring, what's out there? That's a great place for you to get a look at what you might not have been on your radar, that kind of thing. So contribute and draw from that. Again, please populate that needed conference presentations. We'll be meeting again in February. Right now I have it listed tentatively as February 20th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we're shifting to time to try to address the need for other people to have a different time zone, but that is tentative. So I will confirm that after the leadership team, Jody, who's not here, Jody Black's co-facilitator, and Allison, we kind of need to work that out, make sure that works for the 3 facilitators, and then an email should be forthcoming. Thank you for coming today.
And let us know what you need. You know, if there's something that we can do to just help facilitate conversations or resources, just reach out. That's really what we're here for. And so as early adopters, we can all support each other to really try to take a risk and put some of this out there.
And if you haven't yet, somebody added intelligently a Twitter handle column to the attendance sheet. If you're on Twitter, please go ahead and add your Twitter handle on there. And we'll plan to see you around the field, either on Twitter or in the next meeting, or hopefully at some conferences. Take care, everybody.
Great to see you all.